So the next 3 weeks, we're going to have a new series, like what Pastor Dennis said. It's Wholehearted, without the W there, because one writer said that in every heart, there's actually a hole-shaped, a God-shaped thing that's like, a hole that nothing can fill but God Himself. So we're taking you through this journey throughout the only philosophical book in the Bible called Ecclesiastes. Or in some other version, it's called The Preacher. Okay, so we're going to be looking at today, this weekend, we're going to be looking at the meaning of life. What is life all about? And is there meaning to my existence as a person? Okay, and next week we're going to be looking at happiness. What makes you happy? Okay, kung, happy ka, supportahan ta ka, or something like that. And then the final week, we're going to be talking about in the area of control and all that. So hang in there. This is going to be a great series. Okay, we're going to be looking at the whole book, but we are actually focusing on several passages this week. So if you can also read up on Ecclesiastes and all that, it would better prepare you to have a greater understanding and appreciation of this very, very important book about life. When I was a young boy, I almost wanted to kill myself at 15, okay? Because there was just no meaning. I could not see the meaning of my existence. How many can relate to that? And the best I know how to exist was not to exist. If you can understand that. Okay? My know-how of how to exist was not to exist. I actually wanted to kill myself at 15. I was just very desperate. I had no future, or so I thought. There was no light at the end of the tunnel for me. We were raised in not just a broken home, but very, very terrible home. And when I was about 4 or 5, my parents decided to part ways, and we, 3 children, my older sister and my younger brother, ended up with no family whatsoever. In fact, I do not have great memories about my father. I have got 2, although I've got 2. One is when I think I was about 3 and a half or something, and I needed to go to the toilet, I think at about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and I remember my dad actually taking me from the upstairs to the downstairs where the toilet was. And the next memory I had with my father was when my uncle, who was a younger brother of my father, was trying to sort of choke my dad, and he was pretending to kill him. And I sort of cried, and I tried to defend my father. Oh, kill him! And I started to cry. Those are the 2 memories I have with my father. And so growing up, I sort of hated life. I hated my parents because I said, why would 2, intelligent individuals agree to get married and after a while separate, leaving children unattended? And how many of you know that if you're a child, you are dependent on your parents or some adult to bring you up? No child has ever come out of this world and say, from now on, I'm independent from my parents. How many of you said that when you were born? Maybe only those of us from Mandaluyong, Tagaloob, would say that. Every single child is entirely dependent. So when there are no parents to take care of, that child begins to be, at the very least, confused of his own identity, of his own destiny, and essentially of the meaning why this child exists. And I'm sure we all have that questions. Why? What is the number one question of children when you try to talk to them? Gising ba kayo? What? Why? Mommy, why this? Daddy, why that? Because in our heart of hearts, every single person is born trying to determine the why of existence. trying to determine what is this life all about, so that even a child tries to ask that question. And Ecclesiastes helped us to sort of articulate that question. What is the meaning of life? So I take you now to Ecclesiastes 1. In verse 1 in the ESV, verses 1 to 3 says, the words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher. Vanity of vanities. All is vanity. What a way to begin a book. I'm sure Pastor Dennis doesn't begin writing his books this way. Otherwise, he would probably be discouraged to read further on. But wow. I'm not going to read this book anymore. He talks about vanity. But I think at the very beginning, the preacher or Ecclesiastes or the writer Solomon is already trying to tickle our imagination. Trying to set us up to think through life's basic questions. So that he gets our attention and we delve into what he is now going to articulate. Verse 3, what does man gain by all the toil? Or you can say all the works, all the accomplishments, everything at which he toils under the sun. Wow, those 3 verses set us up for what is about to unfold. And that's why hang in there. There are 2 more weeks. Okay? Huwag kayong umabsent, ha? Para masubaybayan ninyo ang mga susunod pang kabanata. So here, essentially, we're trying to find the why of life. Why am I here? What is the meaning of my existence? What is the reason for my living? And it's interesting that the word vanity, at least in the English Standard Version, is mentioned 27 times. And this word vanity is translated in the Hebrew, and the word is hevel, H-E-V-E-L. And it occurs in the book of Ecclesiastes, okay, in different translations, or in a different translation, 38 times than all the other Old Testament books combined. So really, the message of Ecclesiastes is he's trying to challenge us, hey, life is meaningless. What is there to live for? And the word hevel literally means breath, or mist, or vapor. You see it today, it's gone. You see it now, it's gone later. But the meaning, okay, that is the literal meaning, but the meaning behind the metaphorical meaning, as it were, is it's senseless. It's absurd. It is meaningless. And in Ecclesiastes, I think what the author is trying to say, to make us understand the word vanity or meaningless, is that it is so absurd. There is no explanation. It is senseless. It makes no sense whatsoever. So the author uses this word to describe how frustrating, how even unfair, how even senseless life is on earth. Under the sun in his words. And why does he use the phrase vanity of vanities? He says it is the most absurd. It is not just vain, it is the most vain. This morning, my mom came to our house, and, as she was about to say goodbye, she said to my wife, Menchie, meron ka bang lipstick dyan? She wanted to be vain. But I'm not talking about that vain. How many of you are vain here? Women, men. That word vain is cool in a way. Because, you want to look beautiful and all that. But that's not what this is talking about. You remember that phrase, Holy of Holies? Okay? That's the most holy place, right? That's positive. Remember the phrase, Song of Songs? That's also positive. Here is vain of vanities, or vanity of vanities in a negative sense. So in a way, what I think what Solomon is trying to make us understand here is that all these vain things that we run after, in the words of the ESV, striving after the wind, and in the NLT, just chasing the wind. So he says that if you live a life that is described as hevel or vain, what you're trying to do is you're actually running after the wind. You're chasing the wind. How many of you can feel the wind? But how many of you can actually handle or grasp the wind? You can't. It always slips through your fingers. And so what the preacher or Ecclesiastes here, the King Solomon is talking about, is we chase after things, but these things are considered wind. We feel it, but when we finally try to embrace it, it's gone. That's what he's saying. And here, there are 5 things that people chase after, that Solomon says is chasing the wind. The first is what I call power. In the first chapter it says, now this is Solomon, right? The words of the preacher, son of David, king in Jerusalem. In other words, he had the position of being king, not only king in a certain city or a certain country, he was king in Jerusalem. The very city where supposedly the presence of God dwelt. Now, if I told you I am mayor of Lamitan, where's that? I'm mayor of Lamitan. Don't you know where that is? Nothing. But if Solomon tells you, I'm king in Jerusalem. For 40 years, this king was so influential, was so powerful that dignitaries from all over the world, including the Queen of Sheba, came to see him. That was how powerful this king was. And today people chase after power. But when they have finally grasped that power, it becomes meaningless. In the words of Solomon, if you have power and you chase after that, it's like chasing after the wind. Now our leaders in this nation are trying to regroup themselves now. Who's going to be the candidate in whatever year? And there's going to be a realignment of so-called political forces. And it seems to me that everybody wants to become president. That is innate nature of man. He wants power. And some people live for power because if they've got it, they think they have found meaning in life. Solomon says, chasing the wind. But the Bible doesn't care whether the most powerful person on earth, if that is the pursuit of your life, the wisest king of all says, that is chasing the wind. Number 2, not only is he talking about power, he's talking about possessions. In verses 7 to 9 of chapter 2, he talks about Solomon having wealth, having wisdom. So he possessed great amount of wealth. He was the richest person who ever lived. And he was also the wisest. How many of you want to become the wealthiest and wisest? Raise your hand. Ano ba kayo? Narinig niyo ba ako? There's nothing wrong in being wealthy and being wise. I think I had those qualities when Menchi saw me. Of course, I'm joking. But can you imagine? And not only that, Solomon did not just possess wealth and wisdom, he possessed 1,000 women. 700 wives, 300 reserves. Yeah. 1,000 women was under his possession. And yet, he says, chasing the wind. Now I'm thinking, I'm trying to get Menchi be really blessed, and I'm trying to be a great husband. I find that hard, with one wife. How many of you can relate with me? You men, it's a struggle sometimes to minister to your wife and to make them feel like they're really special, but you really have to try hard. Can you imagine 700 wives? And you're trying to do that to each and every single one of them. Plus you've got 300 concubines. Wow. And yet some men think that is the ultimate macho. Because women are swooning around them. Solomon says, chasing the wind. Wow. What is there in life if it's not lovely women? Well, Solomon says that's striving after nothingness. And then he talks about pleasures in verses 1 to 3 and verses 10 and 11 of chapter 2. He tried pleasure. Okay, let's try pleasure. Well, maybe parties, maybe travel, all kinds of pleasures. He tried everything. He must have traveled the world, although there is no record that Solomon traveled. He must have had a lot, because of his international connection, he must have traveled in some other places as well. Not only could he afford it, he was so popular. And so he tried all these pleasures. He even talked about wine. And wine in the scripture, especially in the Old Testament, is a symbol of pleasure. And yet, this same king says, chasing the wind. A lot of people live for pleasure. And yet, when they are in the midst of pleasure, they still find themselves empty, because like I said, there is a God-shaped hole inside of every human being. I don't know what their color is. I don't care what their eyes look like. Every single person on planet Earth has a God-shaped hole that only God can fill. And Solomon says that's chasing the wind when you live for pleasure. And finally, the other thing that Solomon, I think, and this is just my conjecture here, is about his accomplishments, what I call projects. In verses 5 and 6 of chapter 2, it says, I made gardens and parks. And maybe some of you might think that that's a vegetable garden, but that's a huge place. In other words, he poured his energy into all kinds of projects, building projects. He wanted to maybe build the best park, the best garden, and build reservoirs, etc., etc. And today, people seem to find meaning in their projects, in their accomplishments, in the accolades that they receive out of their own accomplishments. Now nations are trying to outdo each other, trying to build the tallest building. Now Dubai hosts it. You come to our part of the world, you see the Burj Khalifa. But that was supposed to be Burj Dubai, until Dubai went into an economic plunge. And so, the ruler of Abu Dhabi, Sheikh Khalifa, gave them billions of dollars to bail them out. But there was a caveat. The Burj was going to be named after a ruler in Abu Dhabi named Sheikh Khalifa. And that's why the tallest building in the world now is not named Burj Dubai. It's named Burj Khalifa. And yet, even when people build such tall buildings, I think in Qatar, they want to build the longest mall in Doha. I don't know how many, like 7 kilometers or something like that. I don't exactly know the measurement. But they want to be known to be hosting the longest mall. So, when that is over, you come visit Doha, Qatar. Again, projects, buildings, business, whatever that may be, you may be able to accomplish them. And yet Solomon, the wisest guy who ever lived, says that's chasing the wind. And then the other thing that he says, and this I want us to understand a lot better, because maybe this will relate to some of us even more personally. You know, in verse 1 of chapter 1, it says, the words of the preacher, right? What does it say? Chapter 1? This is the words of the preacher. And then there is a description of who that preacher is. One is king in Jerusalem, but the other is son of David. And I was thinking, God, why did Solomon inserted his relationship with his father? And I kind of say, well, maybe, and this is my conjecture, maybe he really wanted to become like his father, who was called the man after God's own heart. And to be fair to our hero, Solomon, for now, he did start his life well. His pedigree, both physically and spiritually, were so intact. He did not just drop his father's name like so many pedigreed people do. By the way, I am the sister of the president or something like that. Or I am the, son of the president. Or the chief justice is... pedigreed people tend to drop names of their more famous or more successful relatives. And I think what Solomon is trying to say here, I may have started well, but I chased after the wind. As I went along in my life, as I went along in my pursuit of life, I detoured. I went in the different direction than the direction that my father, King David, took. And so what is he saying? If you depend on your spiritual or your physical pedigree, that is chasing after the wind. If you think that just because you are the son of the pastor or the daughter of the pastor and you depend on that pedigree, you are chasing the wind. If you think that just because you are now a victory group leader, and you find meaning in that, and that is what you live for, you are probably going to be disappointed. Because being a victory leader is great, but that is not the purpose of your existence. That doesn't give the real meaning to your life. And so as Jesus was talking to the crowd one day, I think he was thinking of what Solomon wrote in Ecclesiastes. And so he said these words in Mark chapter 8. Verse 36. And I'm reading from the New King James Version here. Okay? You there? Remember the chasing the wind? Remember that in verse 1? Okay? The words of the preacher. In verse 3 of chapter 1, Ecclesiastes, what does man gain by all the toil? Jesus is using the similar words, similar rendition of the meaning in life. And so when you come down to Mark chapter 8 now, verse 36, the NKJV says, "For what will it profit a man and a woman," or a woman, "if he" what? Remember the word gain there in Ecclesiastes? Gains the whole world, but, or end, loses. In other words, loses his soul. Jesus is talking about not just wealth, not just women, not just wisdom. He's talking about the whole world. If you live for the whole world and you receive that, and that is your gain, and yet you lose your soul, you are chasing the wind. And so, what is the answer to the question, is there meaning in this life? And I take you to John, 1 John, chapter 1, 1 to 3. Here are the words of someone. He also wrote the book of John, remember? And he said that Jesus was the Logos. Okay? That word Logos, by the way, can also mean meaning or reason. And here in 1 John, and we'll end with this passage, he said, now John, including his fellow apostles, "We proclaim to you one who existed from the beginning, whom we have heard and seen. We saw him with our own eyes and touched him with our own hands." In other words, John is saying, we have chased after this man, and our chase was not chasing the wind, because not only did we feel him, not only did we see him, we actually touched him. We grabbed him. We grabbed a hold of him. We were able to grasp the reality of this man. And so he continues in verse 2. He is the Word of life. He is the Logos of life. He is the meaning of life. Verse 2. This one, who is what? Life itself. So this one we saw, we felt, we touched, we heard. When we grabbed the hold of him, he did not slip through our fingers, because he was not that wind. He was the person of Jesus. And he says, this one who is life itself was revealed to us, and we've seen him. And now we testify and proclaim to you that he is the one who is not just life, who is not just the meaning of life. He is the eternal life. So, what is the point of all these philosophical discussions? It's very simple. Here it is. We find life's eternal meaning, not just earthly meaning, not just temporal meaning, eternal meaning, only in a relationship with the person of Jesus. So the chasing the wind becomes chasing the person of Jesus, who is both life and the meaning of life.